Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this first webinar in our series discussing the impacts of COVID-19 global pandemic. My name is Heather Sullivan, and I'm Senior Leader of the Columbia Institute and Valuation Training Programs at CoreLogic. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. So it's no secret that we're in very uncertain times, and unprecedented actions are being taken at much of the country is sheltering in place. But even though many things have disrupted, nearly every aspect of our lives must go on. This is true for the real estate economy. The challenge and dilemma for all businesses, including our appraisal businesses, is how do we continue to deliver quality products and services without jeopardizing our health and wellness of others and ourselves? So there are many questions, and we'd like to try to answer those questions for you today with a panel-style conversation. Before we get started, I do have a couple quick housekeeping items. So today's webinar is being presented live. Our speakers are all coming to you virtually from individual work from home locations. So bear with us if we have any technical glitches like weak Wi-Fi or interruptions like dogs barking or children playing in the background. I know everyone has had those moments over the past weeks. This webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be made available on Columbia Institute's website. We also have a Q&A segment planned at the end of this webinar, so please submit your questions by using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. Make sure to use the Q&A and not the chat so we can keep all the questions anonymous. I do want to thank all of you for pre-submitted questions and helping us identify the information you wanted covered and the panelists you wanted to hear from most. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel of experts. We have Scott Reuter joining us from Freddie Mac, and he will be discussing the temporary flexibilities the GSEs are instating to support appraisers during this time. We have Matt Custer from Truist Bank, and he'll help appraisers gain a perspective and insight into how clients are fulfilling and processing appraisals under these new guidelines. I think it's important for us to understand the challenges that our clients are facing implementing these rapid changes into their workflow to be able to rationalize the appraisal orders being assigned to us currently. Between Scott and Matt, you should walk away with a better understanding of the reasons why all appraisal orders cannot be drive-by or desktop assignments at this time. For those assignments that are desktop or drive-by appraisals, our final speaker, Jay Schaefer with CoreLogic Alamode, will spotlight new technologies developed to aid appraisers in remote and reliable data collection that's easy to use, free, and fully integrated into some of your appraisal software packages. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Scott Reuter. Scott leads the effort for ongoing development and refinement of property valuation risk management strategies for Freddie Mac. He does this by establishing and maintaining a credible quality assurance process across multiple lines of business support. Beyond all this, Scott works tirelessly as a liaison and voice for appraisers. I knew of Scott long before I had the opportunity to meet him, and I'm sure that's the same for many of you. Since beginning my role with the Columbia Institute, I've had the pleasure and the honor of having Scott as a keynote speaker at our Appraisal Summit, as well as crossing paths with him at other industry events. He's very generous with his time and makes himself available to all of us through various forums. Today, he's made himself available to you so you can stay informed, ask direct questions, and get the answers you need to best navigate and adapt the changes that are impacting you most right now. So Scott, I'll let you take it over from here. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Heather, for the nice invitation to join you here today, and really to all of our friends at Columbia Institute. I know Kevin and Danielle are behind the scenes, and it's a pleasure to join Matt and Jay as well on your webinar today. So thank you again for inviting me to be a part of this. So happy to do it. I also appreciate the partnership you have with Freddie Mac and all the good work you do with just across your education platform in general, as well as working to help disseminate this COVID-related information and updates out to the industry. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. What's a GSE presentation without a GSE disclaimer? That's generally my line from the dais, but just a friendly reminder to the listeners that comments here today are my own. Any reference to Freddie Mac policy and procedures is intended to be accurate. However, listeners are certainly encouraged to reference our current published seller servicer guide for any questions or clarifications that they may have. So firstly, I know that these are difficult times, and I certainly hope from a personal, I certainly hope personally that everyone's bearing up well, given the circumstances and understanding the current circumstances and conditions and the challenges presented. Today, I wanted to try to cover a few things. One, some of the challenges and or rather the changes that we're seeing and we've instituted in our appraisal requirements. One, two, discuss some of the new details and expanded flexibilities that we've instituted related to not only the appraisal the appraisal flexibilities rather, but our ACE waiver. And thirdly, make certain that everyone on the call knows where to go to access the current Freddie Mac resources, updates, and COVID flexibilities, as well as our continuing list of FAQs as they do begin to evolve. So let me start by providing an overview on understanding the temporary appraisal flexibilities. As we all know by now, social distancing due to COVID-19 is creating tremendous challenges throughout the home financing process, and that includes appraisals. I would argue that's central. The appraisals are central to that. It's understandable that borrowers and appraisers alike have concerns in the current environment. And so to help ease these concerns and provide a way for lenders to continue to lend in a prudent and responsible manner, both Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, both the GSEs have implemented these temporary flexibilities for property eligibility and appraisal requirements as announced in our single family seller servicer guide bulletin 2020-5. That was announced on March 23rd. We've had two updates, 2020-8 and -11. Our friends at Fannie Mae have lender letters, which you may be receiving or seeing. It's essentially the same content. We're working very closely with Fannie Mae under the guidance of FHFA, our regulator, to introduce these temporary measures to the industry to help provide our sellers with the clarity and the flexibility to continue to lend in a prudent and responsible manner. We also are actively monitoring the developments and will continue to monitor and issue guidance along the way as appropriate. The goal here for us was to align with Fannie Mae on very consistent policies. So these temporary flexibilities, as I said, have been updated twice. So the guidance in the first bulletin, our 2020-5 related to COVID-19, was very comprehensive, and there was a joint working team that put in a lot of long hours in the early to middle part of March, developing temporary guidance, not just in the appraisal space, but related to credit underwriting requirements, the use of, and the ability to use electronic signatures and records, title insurance, of course, the temporary guidance as it relates to property valuation requirements, and then information regarding our ACE eligibility during the pandemic. So I'm going to speak primarily in detail regarding the appraisal flexibilities. So for property valuations, for certain mortgages, when a seller or lender cannot obtain an appraisal with an interior inspection as a result of COVID-19, Freddie Mac will accept either an appraisal with an exterior only inspection or desktop appraisal, where in most of this flexibility is provided in the purchase space. As a part of the temporary exceptions, desktop or exterior only appraisals will be permitted for certain purchase transactions, and exterior only appraisals will be permitted on certain non-cash out refinances where the mortgage being refinanced is held by Freddie Mac. For purchase transactions and purchase mortgages, sellers are encouraged, or we highly encourage sellers to obtain a desktop appraisal in lieu of an appraisal with an exterior only inspection when an interior and exterior inspection is not available. So the minimum scope of work for a desktop does not include an inspection of the property or the comparable sales. So this is an instance where that is really the maximum flexibility that we could offer back to the industry, is to not require an appraiser in those circumstances to have to do an interior inspection. The appraiser, in lieu of that, relies on public record, multiple listing service, MLS, other third-party data sources to help identify property characteristics. Operationally, from a process perspective or standpoint, when a desktop appraisal is obtained using the 1004 Form 70, we consume that as we would any other report through the UCDP portal. Submitting that report through the portal, the appraisal then is scored and assessed based on our tools. For us, it's LCA, Loan Collateral Advisor. For our friends at Fannie Mae, it's CU. And not only are they assessed for quality and completeness, but for value representation, warranty, and the rep and warrant relief, rather, as a result of that. So scoring for rep and warrant relief for any lenders on the call, and my friend Matt, a lot of times that's important to them. They're looking for purchase certainty when they sell a loan to Fannie or Freddie, and appraisals with a risk score of 2.5 or less that meet our requirements in our published guide, I think it's 5601, receive valuation rep and warrant, and the sellers have added risk management to be able to use LCA to aid in the review process. Essentially, they're relieved from value rep and warrant. To accommodate these flexibilities using these existing forms, Freddie and Fannie have worked together to develop also a modified set of scope of work, limiting conditions, and certifications that are to ensure that the language supports the temporary inspections and allows an appraiser to not produce a misleading report, and they are to be associated with the flexibilities when exercised. We've been asked relative to an example of some of the development of flexibilities that are allowed. One is as it relates to photos, and how the appraiser obtains subject photos for the subject property. Photos are permitted and can be obtained from sources such as third-party websites, owners, listing services. Noteworthy, please understand where there's no, there are use restrictions exist on those photos, but other than that, we're allowing appraisers to get very creative in their search. The appraisers, when they do these assignments, they must have adequate information to complete the desktop or exterior only assignment. Appraisers may use, again, multiple listing services, reach out to real estate agents, homeowners, use public records, other online tools. We encourage the use of satellite imagery, street views to help obtain necessary property information. And a good faith effort should be used to provide information that the appraiser believes is reasonable. And if adequate information about the subject property is not available, then that mortgage is not eligible for sale to Freddie Mac, and until the appraiser has sufficient information to complete the assignment. Just a few reminders. In our subsequent bulletin, we included new construction loans. So in Guide Bulletin 2020-8, we extended temporary flexibilities to allow a desktop appraisal for a new construction purchase transaction effective immediately. Freddie Mac does still require certain additional documentation for those appraisals. As described in the bulletin, a lot of them are photos, plans and specs, and a lot of things you might expect that would be associated with a new construction appraisal. And with the temporary exceptions in place, we've been asked if lenders should just default to ordering a desktop or exterior only inspection on purchase transactions. So when you reference back to the 2020-5 bulletin, there's an inset grid. Fannie has a very similar grid in their lender letter that has the permissible product types, and it's not a waterfall. So you don't have to try to get a 1004 and then a desktop and then an exterior. The lenders have the ability to order any assignment type that's permissible in that grid. So as a best practice, I know a lot of lenders are considering, and we may want to submit loans to LPA first to not only see if they qualify for a waiver, but also try to determine in the various markets they're in what product and product type might best fit. I would say that in general, we monitor this very, very heavily now. We have a review team that's dedicated to this and sampling these reports as they come in. I would say the good news for appraisers is, for the most part, appraisers are doing a very good job in adapting to the flexibilities and guidelines announced. That said, we do see some trends and areas for improvement. That's some of the targeted response and messaging we're getting back out relative to how appraisers are putting the reports together, what areas are still causing problems, what are causing some confusion, at times utilizing the correct form, along with accurately populating the map reference field. You may recall there was a field in the existing 100470 that we're repurposing, and also in the 2055 we're repurposing to draw the reader's attention to the fact that you are implementing an appraisal flexibility. Within, the appraiser needs to associate the appropriate modified scope of work, certifications, and limiting condition with that report. So, I would just say in closing, we've been asked whether the policies that Freddie and Fannie have put in place have really proven to be beneficial to the appraisers during this COVID-19 crisis. I would say, in my personal view, these flexibilities go a long way to ensure that appraisers stay safe. I think by broadening our guidelines and allowing desktop and exterior only options, both lenders and appraisers have additional options. And in these markets nationwide, which are very different, that's the important thing. We continue to try to balance, first and foremost, the safety of the appraisers, along with prudent risk management policies and oversight for Freddie Mac. So I look forward to getting to some Q&A, which I understand from Heather will be at the end of the webinar. So I thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to being on for the questions.
Thank you, Scott. You provided a lot of great information there. And the backstory was particularly helpful to understand the rationale behind the changes in the policies and procedures. So thank you for that. And I do appreciate you adding some of the expectations to properly adhere to those temporary guidelines. As a reminder, Freddie Mac does have a web page. We'll go ahead and send that out to you. It contains all the same information that Scott just shared with us. So be on the lookout for that email coming to you soon. I'd also like to circle back later on with Scott with a couple questions that I'm seeing coming up in the queue. So we will get to those. Just hold on a moment. But by building on the GSE's temporary appraisal flexibilities and how these guidelines are being put into place at the lender level, I'd like to now introduce you to a very special guest, Matt Custer. Matt Custer is the Chief Valuation Officer for Truist, and he's going to provide a much needed lender perspective in all this. As you can imagine, in this day of automation and integration, our clients had a short notice and were asked to immediately change direction and focus, so it hasn't been easy. New policies and procedures typically take months to communicate, train, and implement. These changes, lenders only had a moment's notice, and all of this is happening while they're also transitioning their teams to a remote workforce. Basically, everybody's at home at this point. I can tell you from personal experience, this has been a really tested few weeks, right? So I'd like to introduce Matt. Matt, welcome. Would you begin by telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your role with Truist?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Heather. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you today. Also like to give a special thanks out to Scott and the Freddie Mac and team, and as well as Fannie Mae. It wouldn't have been possible to make the adjustments that we've made at the speed at which they've been made if it hadn't been for the quick reaction of Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. As Heather mentioned, my name is Matt Custer. I'm the Chief Valuation Officer for Truist Bank's consumer line of business. My primary responsibilities involve policy and oversight of the residential valuation program. My team works directly with our appraisal operations folks, our originations partners, vendor management, investor relations, and other groups within the bank to ensure that our residential valuation program meets all the federal and state banking regulations, complies with appraiser independence, USPAP, investor and insurer guidelines, and our own internal policies and guidelines.
Thanks, Matt, for that introduction. Will you tell us what your organization has been going through over the past few weeks in response to COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you previously stated, the COVID-19 pandemic it's created tremendous challenges that needed to be overcome as quickly as possible. And as most of you are probably aware, changes like that rarely happen very quickly within lending institutions. And because most lending institutions rely on investors like Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, VA, and HUD, it's imperative that we adjust our processes to ensure that we're meeting our specific investor or insurer requirements. And because the large majority of our processes are automated, issues like COVID-19 force us to create and adopt extensive amount of manual processes to ensure that we're able to continue to serve our clients and meet our investor and insurer requirements. One of the areas most disrupted has been the appraisal process. And we've been working basically around the clock to create a cascade of appraisal alternatives for all products based primarily on what the GSEs had introduced shortly after the pandemic disrupted the lending process. But because we do have other investors, we work with government insurers, and we manage our own portfolio. Um, we needed to develop an appraisal alternative cascade that fit all of the different products.
Thanks, Matt. I knew you were working hard, but that's a lot for any organization to overcome in just a few weeks. Can you also provide insight into the decision factors that lenders use to determine the type of inspection and the appraisal form to be used during this confusing time?
Well, as Scott alluded earlier, it gets kind of tough when you're deciding what type of an alternative is available for perhaps a rate term or no cash out refinance versus a purchase or even a cash out refinance. So, as I'm sure most have experienced by now, not every transaction qualifies for an appraisal alternative. And this is because each different transaction has different levels of risk. And part of that risk is associated with our availability of data and the ability to ensure that we're making a credible lending decision. A good example of this is a refinance transaction for an existing client. In these cases, we typically have historic data available that we can leverage to make sound decisions. But in other scenarios where we don't have a previous appraisal, MLS data, or some other data source, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and it puts us in a position where we most likely can't proceed due to the limitations associated with the lack of data. So as a result of COVID-19, I'm seeing the industry work towards solutions to this problem by exploring virtual inspections and other inspection alternatives. And I find this very encouraging and exciting. And given what we know today because of COVID-19, I think it's important to continue to pursue these alternatives for ensuring lenders, appraisers, and investors continue to have access to the right data to fulfill each of our individual roles in the origination process.
Thank you, Matt. That's excellent and makes a lot of sense. I'm sure our listeners will have a few more questions for you later on in the broadcast, so stick around if you don't mind. I'd like to now introduce everyone to Jay Schaefer, CoreLogic's Senior Executive of Valuation Technology Solutions. In this role, Jay is responsible for software solutions and services for collateral valuations. Before Jay began with CoreLogic, he served as the Chief Executive Officer of Alamode. Jay's team just developed a new tool for non-contact data collection, and he's here today to show you how it works. So Jay, I'll turn this over to you for now.
Thank you, Heather. Happy Tuesday to everyone. It's an honor to be here with Columbia Institute and Scott and Matt and everyone joining us on this call. At the onset of this pandemic, my team wanted to provide appraisers with technology to keep them working and to keep them safe from COVID. To keep them working, we knew that we needed to remotely get property information critical to their determination of value without going to the property. This would also help appraisers under shelter-in-place government orders and with concerns from homeowners entering their house. This was made possible by the GSE VA HUD temporary COVID appraisal flexibilities that Scott previously discussed. The technology needed to be easy, require no logins or additional applications for the appraiser or the homeowner. It needed to be quick and avoid a copy and paste pictures, downloading and saving and opening files. It needed to have information stored in the appraiser's work file so that if questions arise later, you appraisers will have the information you need in one location. Today, I'm excited to demo Property Assist for you. It has helped thousands of appraisers over the past 3 weeks on thousands of assignments. So let's go to the demo. So here we are inside of Total, which is pretty much the tool that, as appraisers know, is the tool that they're in almost every day. And so easily within inside of Total, you can come up to the data menu and see that there's a new item called Property Assist. When you launch Property Assist, it creates a URL that then you can send, a unique URL that you can then send to the homeowner to get this property information. We don't get in the way of whether the appraiser wants to send this via text or via email. So we generate the link and make it available for them to copy into the email or text using their communication of choice. As most appraisers know, they reach out to the homeowner before they come on site to let them know when they'll be there, to schedule the appointment, and a variety of other reasons. We've provided a little bit of text here for them if they would like to use that, but we find that appraisers have, when they do email homeowners, that they have specific information that they want to talk about. And so in most cases, the appraiser can just copy the link. Let's now assume that the homeowner has received the link either via text or via email and clicks on it. And we'll pull that up in a browser. Notice no additional application is required, just right inside of a web application. And they would pull this up on their camera-enabled mobile device. I've have it narrow here so that you can see what the application, the website looks like for a mobile device. You can see that it's for the property address that was inside of the report, and the homeowner at this point would agree to the terms and get started. I've pre-filled some of this information so that it's easy for this demo, but it also demonstrates that if the homeowner gets interrupted or has any kind of problem, they can just go back to the email or text message and click the link, and they'll pick up right where they left off. In this section, we really have what we call kind of the flexible parts of the home, because there could be multiple bedrooms, multiple bathrooms. Some homes don't have a game room, and so we allow the homeowner to select the different types of rooms that they have in their house. This helps guide the homeowner to make sure that they get pictures for each of the rooms. We also have the ability to get the garage and then the basement as well. And this is important for appraisers so that they know which rooms are above grade and below grade. We also provide a text box here, allowing the homeowner to enter any recent upgrades. And in this case, I've entered the kitchen was upgraded in 2018. This allows also for the appraiser to, this also makes the tool very flexible, allowing the appraiser to give additional instructions for text information that can be collected from the homeowner as well. And in the next screen, the homeowner can gather the pictures. The first thing that we do right off the bat is give them photo instructions that are guidance for all the pictures that they take across each of these photo groups, which is outlined in this blue section. And then you'll notice in each photo grouping, we also have specific instructions for that particular photo group. Again, for this demo, I've included pictures already so that we can move a little bit faster through the process. But the homeowner then clicks on this button and up comes the native iOS or Android camera. They take a picture just like we all do currently, and in comes the photo into this particular slot that they clicked on. As you can see, we get the exterior front, left and right from the street, parking, exterior back, and then this is based on the dynamic fields that were in the front part of on the first step. You'll see that we had 1 bedroom, 1 full bath, and a living area. In addition, the tool Property Assist allows you to add any kind of room, including all of these selected, or even a special one that you can fill in for your own. And I won't take a picture for the custom, so you can easily delete it. Also, that can happen as the homeowner as well. And then you click next. Then the homeowner attests to 3 items. One, that it was for the property that's provided, which is shown again up in the left-hand corner. Also, that they are true, the pictures are true and accurate, as well as that it's an accurate representation of the property. Again, this is about making sure that the homeowner understands the information that they're collecting. We also have a help screen here that takes them off to a dedicated section just for the homeowner and shows them sample photos, as well as frequently asked questions and a number of other resources, including a dedicated phone number for the homeowner to call if they have problems. When the homeowner clicks submit, a notification is sent back to the appraiser, letting them know that the property information has been collected. And so we return back to total as the appraiser and back to Property Assist. This status actually changes to complete, letting us know that the homeowner has uploaded the information, and we quickly download the data. Then we easily allow the appraiser to go over to the Photos Power View, and you can see that the photos have come in and easily allow for drag and drop right from what the homeowner provided over to the form, and keeping the photo group label that was designated with inside of Property Assist. No copy paste, no additional files, downloads, or saves. In addition, you can go over to the work file, which is exclusive to Total, and you'll see all the pictures that were provided by the homeowner. In addition, we provided a report that shows exactly what the homeowner filled out, including the attestation questions and the date and time that they filled those out, all the selections of the dynamic rooms, including the comments. We also include the photos, and here you can see the photo groups, which show whether the room is above grade or not, as well as the date and time that the photo was taken, as well as the lat and longitude of the photo. And all of this is included right inside the work file, easy for the appraiser to answer subsequent questions should they arise. So with that, Heather, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jay. That's pretty slick. I can see the applications and value of that app continuing long after COVID-19. I should knock on wood for. All right, everyone. We have 20 minutes or so left for some Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to just start asking some questions that have been coming through or that were pre-submitted. If you wouldn't mind, just as a reminder, use the Q&A button instead of the chat button to ask questions. That's how we're keeping them all queued up and organized, and we're trying to group them together so that we don't ask repeat questions. I did get this question in the queue that appears to be seeking advice from other appraisers in the audience. I'll do my best to answer it based off of conversations I've been having with appraisers attending our TCI virtual classes. since this virus broke out. But if anyone in the audience has additional best practices, please go ahead and submit those through the Q&A window, and we'll compile them and then send out the results after the call. The question is, what protocols and safety measures are appraisers putting in place to protect themselves during a site visit? And well, the first thing we can do is confirm no one is or has been sick at the property, so make that call first. In addition, many appraisers have been asking occupants to open all the doors, including closet doors, turn on all the lights so that you don't have to touch anything while inside the property. Appraisers are also asking occupants to step outside while they're inside the house to obey those social distancing guidelines. Many appraisers are wearing some level of PPE, typically a face mask or gloves. They also have some post-inspection protocols that they're starting to put in place that deal with disposal of your gloves and mask and sanitizing all your equipment afterwards, including your hands, just to avoid contaminating your vehicle. We're obviously not medical experts by any means, so if you have questions about what PPE you should be using, please check the CDC website or consult your doctor. We want you to be safe out there, so definitely take whatever measures are necessary to stay safe. Let's see, Scott, it looks like this next question is for you. Do virtual inspections using Skype, FaceTime, or these new apps like Property Assist count as a personal inspection? And if you wouldn't mind, maybe share your thoughts from both a client and a USPAP compliance perspective.
Certainly, it's a good question. But before I answer that, I'll actually add on to your response in that previous question.
Oh, perfect.
I was surprised, and as a way, an example, this small town we live in Maryland, I talked to a local realtor friend literally just yesterday regarding what she was seeing with showings on her listings. And I was prepared for people really don't want to come in, it's mostly virtual. And I was actually the opposite. She said, well, while we leverage the virtual and online for the hook, right? The people do a lot of that. Fingers do the walking, as the old yellow pages they had used to say. They do a lot of that online in advance. But she said, really, for showings, we have a protocol set up. I have the box of nitrile gloves. We have masks. The property owners typically want to leave, and the interested parties walk through. So anyway, she said almost all at the level of interest are getting interior inspections. So to your question, I think yours was relative to virtual inspections.
Correct.
Using Skype or FaceTime or some of the new technologies or apps like Property Assist, which I agree is very slick, and whether they count as a personal inspection. So a couple pieces to that, and then I think you said there was a client or USPAP compliance question. So there are two little pieces here. One, I'll tell you what they're not, and then I'll tell you what they are. So for us right now, no, they are not the equivalent of a personal inspection as part of a traditional 100470 assignment, where the appraiser is certifying that they have conducted an interior personal inspection themselves. The 100470, along with our other forms, require the appraisers to certify, I've completed a complete inspection of the subject property, and virtual inspections, the way the certifications are written now, are not sufficient to conform with that. Where they are permitted, and where I personally also am excited about them, is as a means to augment a desktop or exterior only assignment to help gather information about the interior of the subject property, the layout, all the condition elements you saw in Jay's demo. I think it's a tremendous tool that appraisers should be very open-minded to utilizing and leveraging now. The GSE set a minimum scope of work in our traditional appraisals, as well as now for the COVID-19 and the temporary flexibilities. So appraisers are always able to go above and beyond those minimum requirements. So we actually encourage the voluntary deployment of this type of technology in this context. Your questioner also asks about my thoughts from a client and a USPAP compliance perspective. I would say from a client perspective, I would certainly encourage and hope lenders and clients to us are our lenders. Clients would encourage appraisers to utilize this technology where it's available and appropriate. And from a USPAP perspective, I would say my understanding of USPAP is allows and permits an appraiser to consider and develop anything they deem credible. So again, we're permitted by assignment type this information, once deemed credible and reliable, I believe could and should be considered. Some of the technologies we're seeing, as Jay mentioned in his property assist, they've got, the appraiser needs to get comfortable. If I was back in the field and utilizing these, I would want to make sure that I was in fact the one sending out the outbound URL to ensure that it's going to the property owner, ensuring that there's some geocoding and security around the photos. I love the certification and the attestation, and there's a lot of those fundamental core elements that I think are very sound. So very exciting, and I would say just understand it doesn't take the place of a personal inspection, but there's a wide use of that product right now.
Yes, great. Thank you, Scott. I agree. Matt, it looks like this next question might be for you. If the appraiser finds out someone at the home has COVID, is the appraiser able to change the product type to a drive-by?
So one of the things that we tried to do was make that communication a little bit easier for the appraiser. And what we've asked our loan production staff to do is when they are receiving an application, before placing that appraisal order, identify if an alternative is available and communicate that through the special instructions on the engagement letter. That way, if an appraiser does make contact and the client or the borrower has concerns around the appraiser, or the appraiser identifies something that gives them concern, they should be able to refer to their engagement letter and know very quickly whether the desktop's available, whether the exterior is available. And we've encouraged our loan production staff, let the appraisers know if no appraisal alternative is available. That way they can go ahead and make a decision right there on the fly, and they don't spend a lot of time having to communicate back and forth with us. Admittedly, it's been a bit of a challenge because the same applies to our loan production staff as it does appraisers when you're introducing new products, new alternatives. It takes a little while for everybody to get comfortable with the new process. So it's definitely a process we've put in place, and it's one that we think we're getting better at each new day that goes by. So if you're dealing with orders from Truist, you should be able to identify based on that engagement letter whether you can automatically pivot to one of the alternatives or whether one's even available.
I bet it's nice to see that information up front, but just in the event, you know, even beyond Truist, if you don't know what the possibilities are, always reach out to your client, talk with them, discuss what, you know, information you have, and they'll work with you to come up with an alternative plan. Don't just automatically change a product type. Make sure you're making those decisions with the client so that they know what they're going to get and not surprised at the end. That's just my own personal 2 cents on top of that. So thank you, Matt. Great answer on that. Let's see, Scott, it looks like this one comes back to you. What extraordinary assumptions are necessary for a desktop appraisal as it relates to the lack of personal inspection?
Okay, well this one's easy, none. So you are not, for GSE work, you're not permitted to invoke an extraordinary assumption. So what's behind that is the fact that the condition cannot be assumed. There must be a data source for the interior condition for the COVID-19 flexibility. So in standing up the 2020-5, Cert 10 in the certifications was deleted, which allows the appraiser to use data that's supplied by an interested party, a homeowner, an agent that might not have been able to have been utilized previously. It also opens up to Property Assist and Jay's presentation, the use of an inspection app, but it cannot be just blindly assumed. Also, as a reminder, USPAP actually requires that before an appraiser utilize an extraordinary assumption, they must have a reasonable basis for using such an assumption. So as I understand that, in this case, there would be no other way possible to verify the interior condition of the subject property, and that's just not true. As a follow-up, appraisers will ask, well, if I'm assuming data about the subject property is correct, isn't that an extraordinary assumption? And the response to that is really no, it's not. So assuming data sources are correct is an ordinary assumption, but you've already sourced that data from somewhere to inform or make an informed decision on the interior property condition. And that's found, an ordinary condition is found in almost all reports. We assume, as appraisers from a practical standpoint, we assume that comp data in MLS is correct. And I rarely, if ever, seen an extraordinary assumption invoked that the comp data is correct. So we have a source in that example, and we assume it to be correct. So I know it's a bit of a nuance for appraisers, and I also understand, in fairness to appraisers, that we collectively haven't done desktop and exterior only work for purchases for the GSEs in a long time. So there's a different scope of work, different certifications and limited conditions. The appraiser's doing that work in that standard too.
So just to kind of follow up on that, so I make sure everyone's clear, because I think this is maybe something that goes against how we've done it in the past, but the extraordinary assumption, we don't make extraordinary assumptions on conditions. So we don't just assume because if we did a drive-by, the exterior was an average condition, we don't assume the interior is an average condition, or from a desktop, we don't make any assumptions on quality or condition. We need to have a source that provides us with enough information to draw those conclusions. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Oh yeah, exactly. And the other dimension to that too is, I know you're a USPAP instructor, Heather. So I mean, it's intended use, intended user. So it's not just form. And I appreciate this from being a practicing appraiser myself for many years. You know, we get so ground in regard to the forms, but these forms are utilized across the industry. I spent time at Goldman Sachs on the capital market side. They utilize drive-by assignments all the time. And as you may utilize, as appraisers may be engaged across REO, servicing, default, capital markets, there's a variety of portfolio loans. Matt may, have with his banking background, there's a lot of utilization of the forms where it may be perfectly fine for the appraiser to make that assumption. We're saying in this instance, it is not. The appraiser cannot just sit at the street and make the assumption on the interior condition without a data source. 2-3-year-old MLS, if your market is if you have confidence that that is representative of the condition of the subject property now, perfectly fine. There are counties nationwide where the public record is very robust. They capture condition and property quality information. If you've got confidence you're in a certain county where that's up to date and accurate, that's a data source. So then you can make an assumption that that data, as you're consuming it from that data source, is accurate. So that's kind of the nuance there.
Yeah, and I did also see something come through the Q&A about leveraging existing appraisals on file. I can tell just from my past experience working for banks and lenders, you can request some of the appraisal information, or the property characteristics, I should say. I've even shared sketches and interior photos. I think the line that we have to draw is we can't go beyond providing quality or condition ratings and things like that. It has to be just factual information that you collect from your lender. So that's another source. If they do have a pre-existing appraisal assignment, maybe it's a year, 2 years old, that would give you a little bit more information. So really get creative with your data sources. Think back of all the different places there might be images or pictures and apps and technology and virtual, it's just crazy how many more tools and technology we have today than we ever had, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Well,
so,
that's right. I talked to an appraiser friend last week in Pennsylvania, and in his small community, the appraisers, we all know each other anyway, right? As the story goes, but they're sharing information out of their files, which they might not have previously done. They'll put a property address up and they blast it out to the network, and typically someone may have done that property. They're just sharing that first page information with them on property characteristics, DNA, and what have you. So I think those are all great ways to continue to not only leverage third-party sources, but think about how we can also help our fellow appraisers.
Yeah, good point. Well, it looks like, Jay, this next question actually is a couple of questions that look similar for you. The question is, what about the reliability of property information provided by the homeowner? And kind of as a follow-up to that question, how can the appraiser be sure that the photos provided by the homeowner are accurate?
So I think there's a couple of things that I left off my demo that I want to catch up before I get to those specific questions. One is that this feature is available with inside of Alamode or Total's form filler. Unfortunately, it's not available in ACI or any of our other competitors. It's something exclusively that we provide to our members. And the second thing is there's a lot of information available on Property Assist at www.alamode.com/Property Assist if you have additional questions or information about it. So you can go there, and we've got an FAQ and a video that can walk you through it again as well. So to your questions, Heather, there's multiple things with inside of Property Assist that help the appraiser to make sure. One is that we make sure that the pictures that are taken actually come directly from the camera, and that's native iOS and Android cameras, so they can't pull it from the camera roll. The other thing that you saw is that we provide the date and time that the pictures were taken, as well as the latitude and longitude for each of the pictures that are taken. So that allows you to know that how old are the photos, as well as where was the location of the photos taken. So again, those are two critical aspects to help the appraiser determine credibility. The other thing is, to protect appraisers, I still encourage you to all, research the information that the homeowner provides. It's just good sound appraising. So.
Yeah, great answer. And yeah, I think, that whole test of reasonableness and checks and balances, we definitely want to take the extra step to try to validate as much of that information through another independent source. But definitely great tools. I know there's other tools out there that are being developed or have been launched. So if you're not a total user, check and see what your software provider is offering, or if there is some other. I've heard of appraisers using Skype and those types of virtual tours as well. So there's definitely options out there. Check with your software provider, check with your lender and client, see what they have available, and get creative. This is a time of change and adaptation and making it work. I can say that for.
Yep. And all that
sure.
information is stored right in their work file in that, in that HTML file that you saw, and it can be printed to PDF as well. So it's good.
Perfect.
Good.
Thank you, Jay. And so, Scott, I think you already answered this earlier, but just to make sure everybody heard you, for a desktop appraisal on a URAR form, does the appraiser need to drive by the comps?
No, that's not a requirement. So in the development of the modified certs and the scope of work and limited conditions, they set forth, again, the minimum requirements for that assignment, which I believe are to require the appraiser to obtain adequate and reliable information, research, verify, and analyze the data, and report his or her analysis, opinions, and conclusions. Also in the certification section, it just requires the appraiser to certify that they have selected and used the comparable sales that are physically, locationally, and functionally most similar to the subject property. So no.
Okay. Yeah, I remember you saying something about that. So just wanted to reiterate that. And it looks like we're about 3 minutes to the top of the hour. So I definitely want to be sensitive to everybody's time. So I think that's about all the time we have for questions today. But since we didn't get to all the questions, we will provide answers to as many as we can in a follow-up email. I'd like to personally thank our panelists and the wealth of information they each shared today. Scott, Matt, Jay, we greatly appreciated your time. Additionally, I'd like to tell you about 2 more webinars that we have coming up in May. On May 19th, we will bring you some tips to succeed during the pandemic. We have Peter Christensen on to address the appraiser's liability, legal liability and responsibilities through all of this. We'll have Jay back on to spotlight additional technology solutions available to appraisers during this time, and he'll provide guidance on communicating with the homeowner and lender. I'll be providing advice on how to start collecting, documenting, and analyzing the market's reaction to this pandemic. And then on May 27th, we'll start looking at the future of the industry and how we come out of this. We'll have Dr. Frank Notaf providing an overview of the impacts of COVID-19 that it's having on the larger housing market, and he'll provide us with an economic forecast. We'll also have Scott Reuter back on to discuss long-term effects of COVID-19 and how it's expected to have, to impact the appraiser profession and the mortgage industry going forward. So lots of great topics still to discuss. If you haven't already, go ahead and sign up for these webinars at columbiainstitute.net. I think the registration link is on the page. And then again, any questions we didn't get to today, we will be following up in an email. I did see a few of those, so be on the lookout for that. We're also recording this presentation and it will be available to you in a couple of days. We'll send out a link to all of you that attended, but if you want to share that link, please feel free to. Thank you for being here today. Please be safe out there and stay well. We know you're all going through a lot right now, so if there's anything we can do, we're here to help. Take care, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Scott, Matt, Jay, Danielle, Kevin, thank you all for participating in this webinar. A lot of great information and we really appreciate it. So good day, everyone. Take care.